The snow had been falling for 6 hours when Command wrote Corporal Nell Voss off the map. She was still up on the ridge when they set it close enough to catch the tail of the transmission before the storm ate the signal, and the words that came through were flat and final. Presumed lost. Last known position, overrun. She lay on her stomach in a scrape of frozen scree, with a wool blanket over the barrel to keep the cold from ticking off the metal. And she did not move, and she did not curse. And the man beside her, a young para-rescue man named Deacon, who had been assigned to spot for her 4 days ago and had spent most of that time terrified of her, heard the word lost come across the net and looked at her the way you look at somebody who has just been told they are already dead. Nell reached up with 2 fingers and turned the volume down. "They'll fix it," she said. That was all. Deacon waited for more, and there was no more. And something in the way she went back to watching the valley through her glass told him she had known this would happen before it happened. The way she seemed to know most things a half-second before the rest of the world caught up. Down in the white below them sat a walled compound. The maps still called a customs house, though nobody had checked a truck there in 20 years, and inside its main building were 9 men from a joint reconnaissance element who had gone in to verify a weapons cache and had instead found the cache waiting for them. Now they were pinned in a stone room with a courtyard between them and any hope of a helicopter, and the storm had closed the sky, and the only 2 friendly assets within 40 kilometers were a corporal the Army had just erased and a scared kid holding her spare magazines. "They spelled your name wrong in the report," Deacon said, because he needed to say something. "If that helps." "It doesn't." A pause. The wind moved the snow sideways across the slope. "But keep it. I'll want to complain about it later." Down in the courtyard, a door banged. She watched a figure cross from one building to another, unhurried. A man who believed he owned the ground he walked on, and she filed the length of his stride, and the second it took him, and the place his boots left dark prints in the white. And she did not fire, because it was not time, and she was very good at knowing when it was not time. If you have ever been counted out by people who were sure they had you measured, stay with this one to the end. Because there is a moment coming on the far side of that courtyard wall that you are going to want to see. Wherever you're listening from tonight, a kitchen in Denver, a long haul across Ohio with the wipers going, do this one small thing first. Tap subscribe. So the next time the world writes somebody off in front of you, the story finds its way back. Picture her stepping through the gate of that compound with a folded flag against her chest and the whole valley silent behind her. Stay to the end, and you'll see exactly how she got there. She was 26 years old and 5 feet and 3 inches in her boots, and every unit she had ever joined had made the same mistake about her in the same order. It had started in a machine shop in the flat brown middle of Kansas in the years before the Army, when Nell was the smallest of 4 kids and the only one who stayed. Her father ran a business rebuilding grain augers and combine headers for farmers who could not afford new, and the shop was a long steel building that held the cold in winter and the heat in summer, and never once held a temperature a body would call comfortable. Her father was not a warm man and not a cruel one. He was a precise one. He had a rule he said so often it stopped sounding like words. And the rule was this: measure it written down, or you didn't measure it. Not measure twice. Write it down. A number in your head is a guess wearing a number's clothes, he told her. The first time she brought him a shaft that was a 16th off because she had trusted her memory across the length of the shop. Put it on paper. Paper doesn't get tired. Paper doesn't want to be done for the day. She had hated it. She had been 11, and she had hated the little grease-smeared notebooks he made her keep. A column for the measurement, and a column for the time she took it, and a column for anything that had changed. The temperature, whether the sun was on the metal, whether the piece had just come off the grinder still warm and would shrink a hair as it cooled. It seemed like madness to write down the weather, to cut a piece of steel. Then one January, she watched a shaft she had cut perfectly in a cold shop bind solid in a farmer's machine on a hot July afternoon. Because steel grows when it warms, and she had not written down that the shop was 40 degrees the day she cut it, and her father had not said, "I told you so." He had just opened her notebook to the blank column where the temperature should have been, and tapped it once with a black fingernail and closed it again. She kept the notebooks now. Different notebooks, same columns, range, elevation, the temperature of the air, and the temperature of the barrel, because they were not the same number. And the difference mattered, the time of every observation, anything that changed. 4 days on this ridge, and she had 30 pages, and Deacon had watched her fill them, and thought it was a nervous habit, until he understood it was the opposite of nervous. It was the thing underneath everything else she did. There was a man down in that compound she had not thought about in 3 years, and did not want to think about now. His name was Thomas Rell. And the last time she had seen him, he had been a staff sergeant with a voice that carried across any room he entered. And he had made her the subject of that voice more than once. It had been at a mountain warfare course, the 2 of them and 40 men. And Rell had decided on the first day that a woman that size on a long gun was a diversity photograph the Army had sent to slow him down, and he had said so, and not quietly. He had a way of being funny about it that made the funny part hard to separate from the cruel part, so that men who were not cruel themselves laughed anyway, and then felt bad, and then laughed again the next time. She had outshot him on the final qualification by a margin that should have ended the argument. It hadn't ended the argument. Rell had a story ready. The wind had favored her lane. The light had been in his eyes. And he told the story so well that some of them believed it, and she had left that course with a certificate and a thing in her chest. She had never set down, which was the knowledge that being right had not been enough and might never be enough, that some men would rewrite the sky itself before they would say her name and a true thing in the same breath. She had heard, second-hand, that Rell had gone to a reconnaissance element. She had not known, until this afternoon, that he was one of the 9 men in that stone room. She knew now because she had heard his voice on the net before the storm swallowed it, giving a casualty count in the same carrying tone he had once used to take her apart. And the count had been 4 able, 2 wounded, and she had lain very still and understood that the arithmetic of her whole day had just changed. "You know somebody down there," Deacon said. It was not quite a question. He had been watching her face. "I know a lot of people everywhere," she said. "It's a small army." "That's not a no." "No," she agreed. "It isn't. She turned a page in the notebook and wrote down the temperature and the time, and did not write down anything about Thomas Rell, because paper was for things that changed, and that had not changed in 3 years. The first morning on the ridge, before any of this, she had done a thing that Deacon told people about for the rest of his life. They had been setting the position in the dark, and the tripod for the spotting scope had a leg that would not lock, a bent collar that had taken a knock somewhere in transit, and Deacon had wrestled with it for 10 minutes in the cold with his hands going stupid, and had finally held it out to her in something close to despair. She had not looked at it for more than a second. She had taken it, run her thumb down the collar to find the high spot where the metal had folded, set the leg against a flat rock, and struck the folded place once with the heel of her hand at an angle he could not have reproduced if he practiced for a year. The collar sprang true, the leg locked. She handed it back and went on with what she had been doing. And Deacon stood there holding a tripod that worked, and could not have told anyone what he had just watched, except that it had the quality of a man fixing something he had built himself, a kind of ownership of the object that had nothing to do with the Army, and everything to do with a life he knew nothing about. He would try to describe it later, and fail. The best he ever managed was, she touched it like she already knew what was wrong with it, which was exactly right, and explained nothing. The storm broke the routine at 1500. It did not break the weather. The snow kept coming. It broke the quiet. And it did it through the radio. Deacon's radio. The small tactical set they had kept alive on batteries they were rationing. A voice came through the static. And it was not command. It was the compound. It was one of the 9. And the words were coming fast and low and stripped of everything but information. Any station this net, any station, we have movement north wall. They're massing. We have 4 able, and we are going to be 3 able in about 10 minutes. Does anybody hear this? Over. 4 able. Nell heard the number and set it in the front of her mind where she would not lose it. And she felt the day gather itself into a point. 4 men who could still fight, 2 who could not. 3 she had not counted yet, which meant 3 already gone or too far gone to matter to account, and she pushed that arithmetic away because it did not help. 4 able. That was the number. That was the number she was going to defend. Deacon. She was already moving, already flattening behind the gun, already pulling the blanket off the barrel. Get me command. I don't care that we're dead. Get me somebody who can say a word I need to hear. The somebody turned out to be a lieutenant colonel named Ward, and getting him took 4 minutes. Nell spent watching men move in the courtyard below, and when his voice finally came through, it was tight in a way she had never heard from him. Voss. A breath. We have you as lost. I have to tell you I signed that. 20 minutes ago I put my name on a letter that says you're gone, because from where I sat that was the truth. And I want you to know. I know what I signed before I ask you what I'm about to ask. Ask it, sir. There's no air. There's no relief for 6 hours minimum, and those men do not have 6 hours. You are the only gun that can see that courtyard. A pause that cost him something. I was wrong about where I put you. I put you on that ridge as a formality. Voss, I'll be honest. I put the small package somewhere quiet, so I could say I had eyes on, and I never thought you'd be the whole answer. I was wrong. Can you hold that courtyard? I can hold it, Nell said. And then, because he had been honest, and honesty deserved company. "I've been holding it since this morning, sir. They just didn't know they were being held." She keyed off before he could answer, and Deacon looked at her, and she was not the person the report said was lost. She was not the diversity photograph. She was not the smallest kid in a cold shop in Kansas. She was a gun that could see the courtyard, and there was work. The work began with geometry. The compound sat in a bowl, and the ridge looked down into it at an angle, and the main building where the reconnaissance men were pinned had its back to her, and its face to the courtyard, which meant every enemy pressing that building was showing her his spine. That was the good news, and it lasted 90 seconds. The bad news came when the men below stopped massing against the building and started using the courtyard the way she would have used it, moving along the base of the north wall where the angle from the ridge was steepest and the wall itself cut her line, so that she could see a man for a stride and a half and then lose him behind stone. And a stride and a half at that range was not enough. She took the first two anyway, in the open ground between the gate and the wall. Two men who thought the storm was cover and did not understand that the storm was hers, that she had spent 4 days learning exactly how the snow moved through this bowl and where it thinned. The rifle spoke, and the sound rolled around the bowl and came back changed, and the first man went down in the open, and the second man, who had been 3 steps behind and should have frozen, instead did the smart thing and got to the wall, and she lost him. "That's them knowing where you are," Deacon said. "That's them knowing where I was." She was already thinking about the wall. The next complication walked in on the radio. Rel's voice, she knew it now, could not unknow it, came up on the net, and it was giving orders to his own men in the clipped shorthand of somebody keeping 4 scared people alive. And then it changed register and reached out. "Ridge, whoever's on the ridge, this is Rel in the main building. I've got a shooter working my north wall, and I can't spot him for you. My angle's wrong. I have a man who has to cross that courtyard in the next few minutes, or the wounded don't make it. Tell me you can keep that ground clear. Over." Nell keyed the net. She let 1 second go by. 1, because she was human, and there was a small, cruel pleasure available to her, and she looked at it and did not take it. "Copy, main building. Ground's clear when I say clear. Who's crossing?" A pause on his end. Maybe he knew the voice. Maybe he was too busy to know anything. "Medics crossing. Corporal, named Salter. He's got morphine and a chest seal, and about 40 meters of open ground, and no cover for the middle 20. Can you keep him alive across the middle 20? The middle 20. She looked at the courtyard and found the middle 20, the killing stretch where a man was in the open to anyone at the north wall, and she found the place along that wall where a shooter would have to be to work it. And she did the thing her father taught her, and she said it out loud to Deacon so it would be real. "Write this down. North wall, 3rd buttress from the gate. That's where their gun is. He can only shoot the middle 20 from the 3rd buttress, because everywhere else the angle's blocked by the well housing. The well housing, a squat stone structure over the old compound well, dead center in the courtyard, useless to everyone until this exact moment. When Salter crosses, their man leans out from the 3rd buttress. That's the only place he can be. Mark it." "Marked," Deacon said, writing. "Tell Rel send the medic." "You want me to tell Rel?" Send Salter. On my mark, count of 3. And he runs the diagonal. Not straight. He runs toward the well housing and he uses it. He crosses behind it. Behind the well housing there is no shot from the 3rd buttress. The stone eats it. Deacon relayed it. There was a silence on the net that ran 4 seconds, 5, and Nell watched the door of the main building and did not breathe. And then the door opened, and a man came out low and fast, with a bag against his chest, and he ran the diagonal, and he ran toward the well housing exactly as she had said. And a shape leaned out from the 3rd buttress of the north wall to take him. Nell had been holding on the 3rd buttress for 11 seconds. She did not have to find the shape. The shape came to her. The rifle spoke, and the shape was gone, before Salter reached the well. And Salter crossed behind the stone, and the 3rd buttress had no shot, and the stone ate the empty air where a shot would have been. And the medic made the far door, and was inside, and Nell breathed out. "Salter's across," Deacon said, and there was something in his voice, the first crack in 4 days of terror, something that sounded like a boy who had just seen a thing he would spend his life trying to explain. "Voss, Salter's across." "Copy. 4 able, 1 medic. That's 5. She was already back in the courtyard. "Tell Rel the north wall's clean for now. It won't stay clean." It did not stay clean. They came again from the east, through a gap where a section of the old customs wall had fallen years ago and never been rebuilt. And they came smart this time, in 2s, one man moving while the other watched the ridge for her muzzle. And she took one, and the other found cover. And the pattern held for a while, one of hers for a long stretch of nothing, the number of able men down there holding at 4. And then, when a round found somebody through a window, dropping to 3. "3 able," said the voice on the net. And it was Rel. And it was stripped down to nothing now. No carry in it, no room, just the number. "Ridge, we're 3 able. I've got wounded I can't move, and a shooter I can't find, and I'm running out of men to hold the doors." Nell keyed the net and did a thing she rarely did. She used a name. "Rel, it's Voss." Nothing came back for a moment. The wind moved across the ridge. Down in the bowl, a door held, and a number sat at 3. "Voss," he said finally, and there was too much happening for him to put anything into it, and maybe that was mercy for both of them. "Where the hell did you come from?" "Kansas. Hold your doors. I've got your courtyard." She watched the eastern gap. "You're going to have to trust the gun on the ridge, Thomas. I know that's not your favorite gun. Do it anyway." And to his enormous credit, in the middle of the worst afternoon of his life, Thomas Rel keyed his radio and said, "Copy, Voss. It's my favorite gun today." Then the radio she cared about went quiet in a way that frightened her. Not Rel's radio, Deacon's. She had sent Deacon crawling 20 meters left to a notch in the ridge, where he could see a slice of the eastern approach. She couldn't, a slice she needed eyes on, and she had told him to call it out. And for a while he had, his voice small and steady in her earpiece. Movement, too, moving left to right. And then he had said stand by, and then he had said nothing. "Deacon." She held on the courtyard and spoke into the net. "Deacon, say status." Nothing. Static. The particular static of a channel with nobody talking on it. "Deacon." She did not raise her voice, because raising her voice would move the rifle. But something in her chest was moving now. Something with weight. The specific fear of a person who has let herself be responsible for a scared kid and has just heard that kid go silent on the far side of a snowfield she cannot cross without giving up the courtyard, which she cannot give up, because 5 men are alive behind that stone because she has not given it up. She counted. She made herself count the way she counted everything. 4 seconds. 6. At 10, she was going to have to decide something terrible. Deacon, it's Nell. Say anything. Say one word. Tap the handset. Give me a click. 8 seconds. 9. A click. 1 click, then 2. Then Deacon's voice, flattened almost to nothing, coming through gritted teeth. Here, I'm here. Slipped on the ice and dropped the handset down the rocks. Had to reach it. There's a guy in the Eastern Gap right now. Nell, he's got a long tube on his shoulder. He's setting up on the main building. He's going to put it through the door. A long tube, a rocket, aimed at the door behind which 5 men were alive. Where? Nell said. And her voice had gone to the flat place, the place with no fear in it, because there was no room for fear, only the work. Exactly where? Use the buttresses. Count from the gate. Eastern Gap. He's not on the wall. He's in the gap itself. He's kneeling in the fallen section. Maybe, I don't know the range, Nell. He's low. He's behind a chunk of the old wall. I can only see the tube and his shoulder. She swung the rifle left and found the Eastern Gap and found the fallen section and found the chunk of old wall, and she found the tube, a dark line against the snow, and the shoulder behind it. And she understood in one cold breath why she was not going to be able to take this shot the ordinary way. The man had done what she would have done. He had put the old wall between his body and the ridge, so that all she could see was the weapon on his shoulder and a hand's width of him behind it. Not enough. Not a shot she would take with 5 men's lives riding on it. Because a hand's width at this range in this wind with the snow moving was a shot she would make 4 times in 5, and 4 in 5 was not good enough. Not for this, not ever for this. I can't take him clean, she said to Deacon, to herself, to her father, in a cold shop 30 years and 1,000 miles away. He's behind the wall. I've got the tube and nothing else. He's going to fire, Nell. I know. And this was the moment. This was the moment. Everything before, it had been quietly building toward, though she did not think of it that way. She thought of it the way she thought of a shaft that would not fit, as a problem with a shape. And every problem with a shape has a place where it wants to come apart, if you have written down enough about it to know where. She had written down a great deal about this compound. Deacon, she said, the well housing, center of the courtyard. What's it made of? What? The well housing, the stone hut over the old well. What's it made of? You've been staring at this compound for 4 days, same as me. Tell me what you wrote down. A beat. She could hear him not understanding and answering anyway, because she had earned that in 4 days, the right to be obeyed before being understood. Stone. Old stone. There's a metal tank on top of it. A water tank. Cylinder. Sits up on a frame. Catches the runoff. Now, what is the tank's full, she said. And now, she was not talking to Deacon. She was talking to the whole shape of the problem, as it came apart in her hands. 4 days of snow melting off that roof into that tank. It's full. It's a full metal cylinder of water, sitting on a frame, maybe 15 feet up, dead center of the courtyard. And the man with the tube is in the Eastern Gap. And the Eastern Gap And the ridge and the tank. She stopped. She measured it. Not in her head. She said the numbers to Deacon and made him write them. Because a number in your head is a guess wearing a number's clothes. The tank is between me and him, not on the line to his body. The wall covers his body. But the tank is on the line to where he has to move. Listen to me. This is the whole thing. So listen, he's kneeling behind the old wall. To fire that tube and actually hit the door, he has to rise. He has to come up off his knee and clear the wall with the tube's back end, because you cannot fire one of those with the back blast against a stone wall a foot behind you. It'll take his own head off. So he has to rise, and he has to lean out to the left into the one place he thinks I can't reach, because from the ridge, the well housing blocks that exact patch of ground. He's using my own well housing against me, same as Salter used it. He thinks he's safe there because the stone's in the way. But the tank isn't stone. The tank is a thin metal cylinder full of water, and it's up on a frame. And if I put a round through the bottom of that tank on the courtyard side, the water comes out the far side, out and down, 100 gallons of it, dropping straight onto the patch of ground he's going to lean into. I'm not going to shoot the man. I can't reach the man. I'm going to shoot the water onto the man. Metal that thin. A round goes in one side and blows the other side wide open, and everything in that tank comes down where he's standing, and a man wearing full kit, hit by that much water off a height, goes down and stays down long enough. And while he's down and blind and choking, he is not behind the wall anymore. He's flat in the open in the middle 20, and the middle 20 is mine. Deacon was silent for a second. Then, that's insane. Right down the range to the tank, Nell said. Bottom third, courtyard side, low as I can go without hitting the frame. And keep your eyes on the eastern gap and tell me the half second he starts to rise, because I have to hit the tank before he clears the wall, so the water's already falling when he leans in. The water takes time to come down. I have to shoot early. Tell me when he moves. She settled the rifle on the base of the tank, on the bottom third, courtyard side, and she found the frame and came up off at a hand's width so she would not waste the round on steel. And she breathed, and she waited, and the snow moved across the bowl, and somewhere behind a stone door, 5 men waited to find out if a corporal from Kansas could shoot 100 gallons of water out of the sky and onto the one place a man with a rocket thought he was safe. He's rising, Deacon breathed. Nell, he's coming up. The tube's coming up. He's leaning. Nell had already fired. The round crossed the courtyard in under a second and struck the bottom third of the tank on the courtyard side, and for a moment nothing happened. Nothing at all. The way nothing seems to happen. For the length of a held breath, after you have done the only thing you can do, and there is no longer anything to do but find out. The tube kept rising. The man kept leaning. The dark line of the rocket came level with the door, and Nell's whole body went to stone. Because she thought she had been wrong. She thought the tank had been half empty. She thought the water was not coming. She thought 5 men were about to die because she had trusted a shape instead of taking the 4 and 5 shot at the shoulder, and the wrong memory came to her. Then the way wrong memories come at the worst possible time. Her father's black fingernail tapping a blank column, the temperature you didn't write down, and she thought, cold and clear. I didn't write down whether the tank was full. I only assumed. And then the far side of the tank let go. It did not burst dramatically. It simply opened, the thin metal peeling where the pressure found the hole the round had made, and 100 gallons of snowmelt came out and down in a single falling sheet, gray-white against the gray-white storm, and it landed on the man in the eastern gap in the half-instant he had leaned into the open to fire, and it took him off his knees and flat onto his back in the middle of the courtyard, the tube flying wide, the rocket going nowhere, hissing off into a stone wall on the far side where it did no harm to anyone, and the man was down in the open, blind, drowning on dry land, his kit soaked and heavy, in the middle 20. The middle 20 was hers. The rifle spoke once more, and it was over, and the courtyard was quiet, and the tank on top of the well housing bled the last of its water down its own side in a thin ordinary stream, like a gutter after rain. "Engagement complete," Nell said into the net. Her voice was flat and clinical, and it did not shake, and that was almost the strangest part, that a thing that enormous could be closed with 2 small words. "Eastern gap's clear. Main building, say your count." There was a silence on the net, and then Rel's voice came, and it was not clipped anymore. It was not carrying. It was a man's voice with the bottom worn out of it. "5 able," Rel said. "5 able, and 2 wounded stable. And we are all, Voss, we're all still here. Whatever you just did, we're all still here." And Nell Voss lay in a scrape of frozen scree, with her cheek against a rifle, and her hands, now finally, beginning to shake, now that it was over, now that there was room, and she pressed them flat against the cold stock, to still them, and did not entirely succeed. And she said, "Copy, 5 able," and she let the number be true, and she did not cry, but it was a near thing, and it would stay a near thing for a long time. Then Deacon was crawling back across the snow to her, faster than was safe, and he slid into the scrape beside her, breathing hard, and he looked at her, and he looked at the well housing with its bled-out tank, and he looked at the empty courtyard, and he could not make the words work. "You shot the water," he finally said. "I shot the water," she agreed. "You can't. That's not—" He stopped. He had been trying to describe her for 4 days, and he had failed every time, and he failed again now. And he gave up, and what came out instead was the truth, small and plain. "I'm going to be telling people about you when I'm an old man. I'm going to be an old man in a chair. And I'm going to be telling somebody about the day the little corporal shot the water out of the sky, and nobody's going to believe me, and I won't care." "They'll believe you," Nell said. "You wrote it down." She tapped his notebook where it stuck out of his chest pocket, the range to the tank in his own cold, cramped hand. "Paper doesn't get tired." The helicopter came 4 hours later, when the storm finally cracked open, and the world that arrived with it didn't know what to do with her. The first person who couldn't reconcile it was a woman from the Joint Task Force's review section, a major named Kessler, who had flown in with the recovery element and who had the report in her hand, the actual report, the one with Nell's name spelled wrong and the word lost in the summary line. Kessler was not a cruel person. She was a careful one, and careful people need the record and the human being in front of them to be the same size, and these two were not. Corporal Voss! Kessler had found her in the warming tent, wrapped in a blanket, drinking something hot, her rifle broken down and cleaned and cased at her feet because she had done that first, before the blanket, before the drink. I'm trying to write this up, and I have a problem. I have a report that lists you as a casualty, and I have 9 men, 11, with the medic and your spotter, who are alive, and the account they're giving me is not physically possible. They're telling me you disabled an anti-armor threat by shooting a water tank. That's right. Water tanks don't stop rockets, Corporal. No, ma'am, they don't. I didn't stop a rocket. I put a man on his back with 100 gallons of snow melt so I could take a shot the wall was blocking, and then I took the shot. Nell said it without heat. She had her notebook out, and she pushed it across the table. It's all in there. Range to the tank, capacity of the tank, 4 days of melt runoff, the line from my position to the eastern gap, and where the well housing crossed it. My spotter's book will match mine. We wrote it down as it happened. You can check every number. Kessler looked at the notebook. She looked at the columns, the temperatures, the times, the range to the tank, with a little arrow, and the word water underlined once. She turned a page and found 4 days of the same patient hand. Everything measured, everything witnessed, and the thing that had not been possible when it lived only in 11 men's frightened accounts became, on paper, in 2 matching columns, simply a record of what a person had done. You wrote down the temperature of your barrel, Kessler said slowly, separately from the air. They're not the same number. The difference matters. Nobody writes that down. My father did, Nell said. He rebuilt combine headers. He'd have told you a number in your head. Is a guess wearing a number's clothes? She took the notebook back gently. I don't need you to believe me, Major. I need you to check the book. That's the whole point of the book. It doesn't ask you to believe it. It just turns out to be right. Kessler closed the report with the wrong name in it. When she wrote her own, she wrote it from the notebook, and the notebook did not get a single thing wrong. And that was the end of the question of whether it had happened forever. It was late that night, in the dark of the warming tent with most of the camp asleep, that Nell said the thing she had not said to anyone. Thomas Rell was awake too. He was sitting 3 cots down, with his back against a supply crate and his hands hanging off his knees, and neither of them had spoken for a long time, and the quiet had gone from awkward to something else, something you could talk inside of. I thought it wasn't full, Nell said, to the dark. Not to him, exactly. The tank. When I fired, I was already sure I'd got it wrong. I had a full second where I'd killed all of you in my head. I saw it. I'd taken the shot on a guess, and the water wasn't coming, and you were all dead, and it was because I didn't check. I only assumed. And there's this thing my father used to... She stopped, started again. I have never, in my life, taken a shot I wasn't sure of. Not once. That's the whole thing I am, is that I don't take the shot until I'm sure. And I took that one on an assumption, because there wasn't time to be sure, and it worked. And I don't. Her voice did something it did not usually do. I don't know how to hold that it worked. Because if it had been half full, if I'd been wrong about the melt, everybody dies and it's my fault, and the only difference between me being the person who saved you and the person who killed you is a thing I didn't actually check. That's not skill. I don't know what that is. But it isn't the thing I've spent my whole life believing I am. Rell was quiet for a while. Can I tell you what it looked like from inside that room? He said finally. Because you've got it wrong, and I may be the only person here who can tell you how wrong, on account of I spent a whole course 3 years ago telling everybody you were an accident." He shifted in the dark. "You didn't take a shot on an assumption. I've watched you work now. You spent 4 days filling a book with every number about that compound a person could measure, including a water tank nobody else on this earth would have thought to measure. Because you measure everything. Because that's the disease you've got. So, when the second came, that you had to bet a life on a number, the number was already there. You'd already done the checking. You did it 4 days early, in the cold, when it was boring, when there was no reason to except that you can't not. That's not luck wearing skill's clothes. Voss, that's skill 4 days ahead of when you needed it. The being sure happened on day 1. You just spent it on day 4. Nell did not say anything for a moment. "That's a nicer version," she said. "It's the true version. I'm a witness. I was in the room." A pause. "I've been wrong about you out loud, in front of people, and I'm going to have to fix that out loud, in front of people, and it's going to be the worst 5 minutes of my professional life, and I've earned every second of it. But that's tomorrow. Tonight I just wanted you to have the true version before you tried to sleep on the wrong one." There was a debt in Nell's life she had carried since before any of this, and it got paid in that same tent 2 days later by a person she had not expected. The debt was her brother, the oldest of the 4 Voss kids, a man named Cole, who had left home first and left hardest, who had told their father at 19 that a life spent writing the weather in a notebook was no life, and had gone, and had not come back, not for holidays, not for the funeral. When their father's heart finally quit in the shop, he never left. Nell had made the calls that week, all of them, to Cole's last 3 numbers, and none of them had reached him. And she had buried her father with 2 siblings present and 1 absent, and had stopped, after that, trying. That was the unpaid thing. Not a fight. A silence she had let harden, because reaching into it again meant risking that he still would not answer. And she had decided somewhere she could not survive that a second time. So she had simply stopped, and told herself it was his move, which was a way of never having to make one herself. She had said none of this to anyone, but grief finds its own level in a tent full of people who nearly died, and somehow across 2 nights it had come out in pieces to Salter the medic, who was the sort of person things came out to. And Salter, it turned out, was from a town 9 miles from where the Voss kids grew up. "Voss," he said on the second morning, sitting down across from her with 2 coffees and the careful face of a man who has decided to say something and is not sure he should. "Your brother, Cole Voss. Older, tall, worked hydraulics." Nell went still. "How do you—" "He does the ag equipment repair for half the county now. Took over a shop outside Salina. My uncle farms. Cole's rebuilt his header twice." Salter turned one of the coffees in his hands. "I'm telling you this because you should know it before you decide anything about him. He's got a sign in that shop, hand-painted, over the workbench, been there since he opened. I've seen it. It says measure it written down, or you didn't measure it." The tent was very quiet. "He put up the sign," Salter said gently. "The thing your dad used to say. He left because he couldn't stand it, and then he built a whole life on it, and put it on the wall so he'd see it every day. That's not a man who forgot where he came from, Voss. That's a man who's been standing in a shop for 10 years, under the exact words he ran away from, probably too proud or too ashamed to be the one who calls first. Same as somebody else I could name. He slid one of the coffees across to her. You've been telling yourself it's his move. I think you've both been telling yourselves it's the other one's move. And you're going to keep telling yourselves that until one of you turns out to be brave in a way that's got nothing to do with rockets. I'm just a medic who happens to be from 9 miles away. But I know that sign. And I know a person who's kept a thing alive doesn't need much of a reason to pick up the phone. He just needs to hear it's safe. Nell looked at the coffee. She did not pick it up right away. But something that had been hard in her chest for 4 years had a crack in it now, put there by a near stranger from 9 miles away who happened to have stood under her father's words in her brother's shop. And she knew, the way she knew when it was not time to fire, and the way she knew now that it was, that she was going to make the call. The apology came before she made it, in front of the whole recovery element, and it cost Thomas Rell exactly what he'd said it would. He did it in the daylight, in the open, in front of the men who had heard him take her apart 3 years ago, and some who had only heard the stories, and he did not do it smoothly. He stood up at the end of the recovery brief when there was no reason to stand up, and he said, "Before we break, I've got," and stopped and started over. 3 years ago, at the mountain course, I told anybody who'd listen that Corporal Voss was a photograph the Army sent to slow me down. I said it funny so it'd land, and it landed, and some of you laughed, and I made it easy too. I want to... He stopped again. His jaw worked. I told a story about the wind being in her lane, so I wouldn't have to say she outshot me. And I told it so many times, I half believed it. And 2 days ago, she held a courtyard I couldn't hold with a gun. I spent a whole course saying didn't belong there, and she pulled a shot out of a water tank that I still don't fully understand. And every man in that stone room is alive because the person I made a joke out of was better than the joke and better than me. And I knew it 3 years ago and lied about it because I couldn't. He didn't finish the sentence. He just looked at her, wrecked and upright, having risked in front of witnesses the one thing men like him guard hardest, which is the story they tell about why they lost. I'm sorry, Voss. That's the whole of it. I'm sorry. Nell looked at him for a moment. She did not make it cheap, and she did not make it a punishment. Say my name right in the next story, she said. That's the fix. And Rell nodded, once, like a man accepting a sentence that was lighter than he deserved, which it was. And that was the end of it. And also the beginning of the version of the story he would tell correctly for the rest of his life. There was a phone call she received before she made the one to her brother, and it undid her more than any part of the fight had. It came through the task force's family liaison, patched to a handset in the comms tent, and it was the wife of one of the reconnaissance men, one of the 2 wounded, a sergeant named Boyd, whose chest seal Salter had carried across the middle 20. The wife's name was Anne. She was calling from a kitchen in Georgia. She did not have a single word of military vocabulary, and she did not use one. Is this her? Anne said. Is this the one on the hill? They told me your name was Voss. Yes, ma'am, this is Corporal Voss. I don't know how to... Anne's voice was already going. They told me what happened. They told me my husband was going to be... that he was one of the ones who couldn't walk, and that a medic had to run across to him, and that a medic couldn't have run at all if somebody hadn't. She stopped. Started over. The way Nell herself started sentences over now. I made him promise he'd come home and teach. He was supposed to teach. And then she could not talk about whatever Boyd was supposed to come home and do. It was too large. And she abandoned the sentence and said the only thing that would fit through, which was, "You kept my husband alive, and I don't know you, and I will pray for you every day I've got left. Every single day. I don't know what else to give a person for a thing like this. I don't have anything the size of it." Nell, who had held a courtyard and shot the water out of the sky and not cried, found that she did not know how to hold this either, and for a different reason. She opened her mouth to say something appropriate, something about doing her job, and none of it would come, because there was no version of doing her job that was the size of a woman in a Georgia kitchen, promising her every remaining day. "He ran," Nell finally said. "Your husband. When they told him it was time to move him out to the bird, he was hurt bad, and he still made his own legs work part way. I heard it on the net. He was trying to get home to you the whole time. I kept the ground clear so he could." She swallowed. "You don't owe me days, ma'am. I'd have done it for anybody. But I'm glad past saying that it was somebody with a wife who talks about him like you do. Hold on to that man." "I will," said Anne. "Oh, I will." And Nell hung up and sat with her hands flat on her knees for a long time, because that, more than the tank, more than the courtyard, was the thing she was going to carry. They recognized her 4 months later, in a hall, with a flag at the front, and 300 people in seats. And the story of that afternoon had traveled far enough by then that the room already knew before she walked in. But this is not about the citation they read, though they read one. It is about the room. It is about how the recovery of that reconnaissance element had become, by the time the paperwork caught up, a thing spoken about in careful voices in rooms where careers are decided, and how the account had gone around that a corporal the Army had listed as lost had walked back onto the net and held a compound alone through a storm, and how there had been, in that account, one image that nobody could shake, an image from the recovery footage that a door camera on the helicopter had caught, of the small corporal coming out through the gate of that compound at the end, in the blue last light, walking ahead of the 11 men she'd kept alive. She was carrying something. When the reconnaissance element had been overrun at the start, they had lost their guidon, their small unit flag, in the first building they'd been pushed out of, and it had sat in enemy hands in that compound for the length of the fight. And on the way out, nobody had ordered her to. It was not her flag. It was not her unit. Nell had gone into the building where it had fallen, walked in through a door still scarred from the fight, and picked it up off the floor where it had been trampled, and folded it, and carried it out through the gate against her chest, because a unit that loses its flag in a place like that does not get it back unless someone goes in and gets it. And she had decided, in the quiet after, that someone was her. The door camera caught all of it. Her going in small and alone, her coming out with the folded flag held against her, the 11 men falling in behind her without being told to, because you fall in behind a thing like that, whether you outrank it or not. So when she walked into the hall, 4 months later, the room had seen the footage, And this is what the room did. The first face to change was a colonel in the third row who had been on the board that approved her posting to that ridge as a formality, and who had spent 4 months understanding what he had almost signed away. And his face went from composed to something naked in the space of one breath. And he was the first one up. He stood before the citation was finished, which is not done, which breaks every protocol of a room like that. And he stood anyway, because his body did it before his rank could stop it. And once he was up the row behind him, could not stay down. And then it moved through the hall, the way water moves, not all at once in a spreading sheet. 300 people coming to their feet for a woman who was 5 feet 3 inches tall, and did not herself move at all. She stood at the front and let it happen to her, and did not know what to do with her hands. Lieutenant Colonel Ward, who had signed the letter that said she was lost, was in the front row, and he couldn't look at her at first, and then he made himself, because looking at her was the least of what he owed, and he had decided to pay all of it. Thomas Rell was there in his dress uniform, standing straight up with his jaw tight and tears on his face he did not wipe, because wiping them would have been a kind of hiding, and he was done hiding about her. Deacon was there, no longer a scared kid, on his feet clapping so hard his hands must have hurt, mouthing something to the person next to him. Probably she shot the water. Probably nobody believed him. Probably he didn't care. And in the very back, in a seat he had gotten to on a flight, he had bought himself the day the task force found his number and asked would he want to come, stood a tall man who worked hydraulics in a shop outside Salina under a hand-painted sign, and who had picked up the phone 3 months ago when it finally rang because he had been waiting 10 years for a reason that felt safe. And Cole Voss stood in the back of that hall with his hand over his mouth and watched 300 people rise for his little sister, and could not have said a word if his life had hung on it. The room stayed up for a long time. Nobody has ever been able to say exactly how long. It was the kind of silence and thunder that does not get measured, that lives instead in the bodies of the people who stood inside it. And Nell stood at the front and took it the way she took everything. Quietly, level-eyed, already a little embarrassed, already wondering when she could sit down. Deacon found her afterward in the emptying hall, and he had grown into himself in 4 months, and he finally had his words. I figured out how to say it, he told her. What I couldn't say on the ridge. I've been working on it. He took a breath. Everybody keeps talking about the water tank like that was the thing, the impossible shot. But that wasn't the thing. Anybody who got lucky could take one impossible shot. The thing was the 4 days before it. The thing was you lying in the cold, writing down the temperature of a water tank nobody would ever need, on the off chance the world came apart in exactly the one way that made it matter. That's the thing about you nobody can copy. You do the boring part like it's the important part. And then one day, the boring part turns out to be the only thing standing between 11 guys and a stone floor. He shrugged, a little helpless in the face of it. That's it. That's what I couldn't say. You do the boring part like it's the whole war. It is the whole war, Nell said. Everybody just finds out on a different day. The persistent cost did not show up in that hall, and it did not show up in the citation, and it was not the kind of thing a door camera could catch. It was this. She could not make herself stop keeping the book, and it had stopped being a choice. Before the compound, the notebooks had been a discipline, a thing she did on purpose, the way you choose to do a hard, good thing. After, they became something she could not put down. She wrote down everything now, everywhere, all the time, ranges she would never shoot, temperatures in rooms with no rifle in them, the time of day in a grocery store, the melt off a roof that was just a roof. She had bet 11 lives on a number she'd written down 4 days early, and it had worked, and some wire in her had been fused by that in a way that would not unfuse, so that now the thought of an unrecorded number, a thing observed and not written, produced in her a low, steady dread she could not talk herself out of. She had traded, without agreeing to it, the ordinary human ability to simply be somewhere without measuring it. She could not go for a walk. She went on surveys of the world that happened to look like walks. The people who loved her learned to wait while she stopped and wrote down the height of a thing that did not matter. And they learned not to ask. And she was grateful. And it was a cost. And it did not go away. A year and a half later, the shop outside Selena had 2 names over the door. Cole had asked her, on the 3rd or 4th of the long, careful phone calls that rebuilt the thing between them, whether she'd want her name up there too. Not because she'd ever work a day in it, they both knew the Army had her, but because their father's business had died in that cold building with him, and Cole had quietly restarted it, and it felt wrong, he said, to have the Voss name over a repair shop and only one Voss on it. So they put both names up. And under the 2 names, still, the hand-painted sign, measure it written down, or you didn't measure it. Cole had a customer now, a young woman from a failing farm, 2 counties over, who couldn't pay full and could weld like nobody he'd trained, and he'd taken her on, and she was going to have the shop someday, and she kept a notebook because Cole made her, and she had no idea the notebook had come down through 3 people and a war to reach her workbench. That was one future. The other was Deacon, who had put in for the training pipeline to do the long gun work himself, and who had been told he was too tall for it and had done it anyway, and who kept, in his own cramped hand, a book with a column for the temperature of the barrel separate from the air, because he'd watched it save 11 lives and would keep that column till he died. Sergeant Boyd, whose chest seal had crossed the middle 20, had come home to Georgia and to Anne, and the thing he'd promised to come home and do, the thing she couldn't get through the sentence about, on the phone that first day, was teach an adult literacy class at their church, a room of grown men and women learning to read, a promise he'd made and nearly not kept. He kept it. Anne sent Nell a photograph once, no note needed, of a church multi-purpose room, and a dozen adults at folding tables, and Boyd at the front with a book, and on the back, in Anne's hand, every day, like I said. Nell looked at that photograph a long time, and then she did the thing she did, and wrote the date on the back of it under Anne's words, because a thing that mattered this much should be measured, and measured meant written down, and she had made her peace, mostly, with being a person who could not stop. They asked her once, an interviewer, near the end of a piece about the recovery, what she wanted people to take from it. She thought about it longer than the interviewer expected. That the shot everyone remembers isn't the one that matters, she said. The shot everyone remembers took half a second. The one that mattered took 4 days, and it was boring and nobody would have filmed it, and it was just a woman in the cold writing down a number she was pretty sure she'd never use. That's where it's won or lost. Not in the half second. In the 4 days, nobody claps 4. She almost stopped there. Then she added the rest. Because it was true, and because her father was 3 years dead and could not say it himself anymore. My dad used to say, a number in your head is a guess wearing a number's clothes. I used to think it was about being careful. It's not. It's about being ready to be brave on a day you don't get to pick. You can't decide to be brave when the moment comes. The moment comes too fast. All you get to decide is whether you did the boring part early, so that when the moment comes, brave is already sitting there waiting for you, written down. The ridge above the old compound is empty now, of course, but if you went up there, to the scrape of frozen scree where a corporal once held a courtyard alone, you would find, wedged under a flat rock, where she left it against the wind, a small notebook gone soft with weather, its pages nearly washed blank by 2 years of snow and sun. She left it on purpose, the last time through, when the task force brought her back to walk the ground for the record. She could have kept it. It was hers. It was the book, the actual book, the one with the range to the water tank in her own hand. But she wedged it under the rock instead and left it on the mountain. And when Deacon asked her why, she said that some numbers belonged to the place they were taken in, and that any shooter who ever lay in that scrape in the years to come and found a weathered book full of a stranger's careful columns would understand, without a word being said, what the ground demanded of the person who held it. A record left like a lamp left on. Proof that someone had done the boring part here, in the cold, and that it had been worth doing. She stood a moment on the ridge before she left it, the same ridge, named the same way on the same maps, the bowl below her white and quiet and holding no one. She was not lost on it this time. She had never really been lost on it. She looked down at the compound one last time, level-eyed, easy in her boots. A small woman the wind moved around, and then she turned and started down, unhurried already, out of pure habit, noting the temperature of the air and the angle of the light and the time, not writing it down this once, just knowing it and letting that be enough. And she walked off the mountain into the rest of it, with her hands loose at her sides and something in her face that a person could only call peace.